Good evening, guys. It's Heather, and tonight I am in the kitchen canning again. It seems to be a favorite after dark activity of mine. This past weekend, we actually processed almost 30 rabbits with the help of some really great friends. We have a lot of rabbit in the freezer right now, and I thought it would be kind of fun to can all of the rabbit that we processed this past weekend. So I'm going to show you a little bit of that process. I can't quite fit one rabbit per jar, so I'm working on the last two right now and thought I'd bring you along. So after we process the rabbit, we put them in a bucket of water with some salt in it to help draw out the rest of the blood that's in the rabbit. I do have a video that shows how I part out a whole rabbit. I'll link that up above so that you can see a little bit more close up and more in detail of what I'm doing. I'm not going to go over that whole intricate detailed process here, but you can go ahead and bookmark that video and watch it later. So we're going to be canning this rabbit with the bone in. It's not impossible, but not enjoyable to try and take rabbit off of the bone. There's a lot of little bones, and the connections, like the tendons and things in the rabbit, are very well adhered to the bone, and it's not very easy to get all of the meat off of the bone. It's much easier to cook rabbit on the bone, and the same goes for canning rabbit. Stick it right in. So I'm going off of the recipe that is actually for canned rabbit on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website. I will link that recipe below. And it is a pressure canning recipe. Rabbit is a low acid food, all meats are, and they need to be pressure canned if you're going to be canning them safely. I've heard that the fat isn't very good on rabbit. I haven't really noticed, but I pick off any fat at this time. So when we freeze our rabbits whole, I'll freeze them with the fat on it, and I won't worry about pulling that off until I go to cook it. It's a lot easier to take the fat off the rabbit after it's already chilled. If you're processing your rabbits and it's still at body temperature, it's not as easy to pull off the fat. So don't worry about taking the fat off of your rabbit until the rabbit's chilled. You also want to make sure that you've allowed your rabbit to rest for around 24 to 48 hours post-processing. You want to be able to move the joints around. You want rigor mortis to have completely left the rabbit. That goes for if you're going to be fresh eating or if you're going to be freezing it or anything like that. Your meat is going to be tough if you don't allow this rest time. I have heard that you can freeze fresh meat, thaw it out, and allow it to rest after freezing. I haven't specifically tested that out, but I believe that's a logical option. It's pretty important to have the rigor mortis settled out of the rabbit before you go to can it, just so you can fit the limbs into the jar as easily and as thoroughly as possible. See this arm, it tucks right in. It's perfect. The recipe has us looking for 1 1/4 inch headspace. That's 1 1/4 inch of airspace on top of the raw rabbit inside the jar. And that looks just about right. Now, if you've got a bone here or there sticking up into the headspace, I really wouldn't worry about it too bad. You just don't want chunks of meat up above the 1 1/4 inch headspace. A little bone here and there really isn't going to make or break your canning process, so don't worry about that. Here's our full jar of rabbit. We've got our 1 1/4 inch headspace at the top, and I'm not going to top it off with water. I do have 1 teaspoon of pink Himalayan salt at the bottom here, and there's not going to be any more liquid than what comes out of the rabbit during the processing time. And it will create its own broth. I'll be sure to show you that at the end. I'm going to take a clean cloth here and some vinegar to wipe off the rim of the jar. This is really important. Don't miss this step. You don't want any extra fat or salt or anything to be on the rim of the jar that may prevent your seal. We have a regular lid and ring, fingertip tight. My Presto canner fits 7 quarts, so I just need 1 more quart of rabbit to make that happen. Make sure to save these extra bits, the rib cage and the hip bones. This is going to make amazing bone broth. This bag of bones is going to the freezer. And so you don't want to leave too much head space either. If you don't have enough rabbit to fill up to the head space, at that point you can fill up with some water to make sure that your head space is met. But if you've got enough meat to fill up to your 1 1/4 inch, do that. But it's not like you have to not process the jar if you don't have enough meat. Just fill up the rest of the space with water. The belly flap portion here, or like the abdomen, the skin or muscles that cover the abdomen, this is a great piece to kind of save to the side to make up that head space. You can easily cut portions out that make it fit nicely on the top. So, proper head space met. Fingertip tight. And as always, before you start pressure canning, make sure that your canner is in sound working condition. You want to check that this nut here is holding on the pressure valve properly. You want to make sure you can look through this vent hole here and make sure that the vent hole is clear. I can see straight through it. Sometimes I'll blow air through it just to double check. You want to make sure that this locking mechanism moves freely up and down and that there's no dry rot or cracking or anything on that little pressure release. This is the emergency pressure release valve, and your ring here. You want to make sure that this sealing ring doesn't have any blemishes or whatever, cracks, and if it does, you're going to want to replace it. I have a replacement in my cabinet. If you don't have something like that on hand, I would highly suggest that you have it, because it would be really unfortunate to get all of this done and then realize that you're not really ready. Your canner isn't safe. Keep extra parts like that in your cabinet. You don't want to have to need it and not have it. Especially if you're like me and you live in the middle of nowhere and like to can after dark when all the stores are closed. So everything's good here. Turn it on high. Make sure I've got my rocker handy. We won't put that on quite yet. I've just got it sitting on the lid here. And we're going to wait for the water to boil on the inside to start to create pressure, and that's going to create steam out of this vent pipe here. So I'll bring you back when we're at that point. We've got a real good steady stream coming out of the canner. I've set our timer for 10 minutes so that the steam can make sure to fill the chamber, and after the 10 minutes is up, I can add our weighted gauge onto the vent pipe. We are canning at less than 1,000 feet elevation, so we get to use our 10-pound weight. If you are canning at a higher elevation, check the National Center for Home Food Preservation to make sure that you're using the correct weight for the elevation. You'll notice too that as you're canning, this little safety button will engage, and this locks the lid on. This is a mechanical safety feature on these newer canners. Once you've created enough pressure inside the canner to lift up on this lock, the button comes up and it does not allow the lid to twist or come off. So this is an amazing safety feature. If you're scared of pressure canning, know that there are several safety features built into these canners. You've got your lock here, which is a mechanical thing. When there's enough pressure, it automatically goes up, and it doesn't go down until there's no pressure in the canner, so that's great. And then there's a little valve back here where if the pressure in the canner exceeds more than is safe, that little valve will blow. It's towards the back of the canner, so you don't have to worry about getting burned, and it will allow steam to exit the canner without the lid blowing off. So fear not the process. A lot has changed with pressure cookers and pressure canners, and they are very, very safe. You still want to be smart, but don't fear. All right, the 10 minutes is up. I'm gonna add my 10-pound weight onto the vent pipe. This little needle is going to come up to 10 pounds of pressure, and it may go a little bit beyond before our rocker here starts to jiggle. And when that starts to jiggle on its own, that's when I can set my timer for 10 minutes. I'm going to want to maintain enough pressure inside the canner, 10 pounds of pressure, for a full 75 minutes, according to the recipe. We are canning rabbit with the bones. The times are different without the bones, so double check all of that on the website. And I may need to lower the temperature on my burner to make sure I'm maintaining the temperature and I'm not going too high on my pressure. I'm going to be here in the kitchen watching this and listening to the rocker. I don't want it going a million miles an hour as it's rocking back and forth. A nice steady rock is plenty, but I don't want the rocker to stop. If the rocker stops rocking and it doesn't begin rocking again quite quickly, I think technically it's supposed to rock at least 4 times every minute, then I need to increase the temperature a little bit so that it begins rocking again, and make sure that the dial gauge on the canner doesn't come below 10 pounds of pressure. If you're canning above 1,000 feet elevation, you want to make sure that it doesn't come below 15 pounds of pressure. But for here in southwestern Kentucky, we're going off of a 10-pound gauge. So I'll make sure that I maintain that for the full 75 minutes, and I'll come back after that 75 minutes is up. Buttermilk. I keep getting you guys messy. Seems like the pig pen and the kitchen aren't places for you. Okay, all better. Okay, everything is all done. We went through the whole 75-minute canning process, and I shut off the burner. At that point, I allowed the pressure to completely leave the canner, as indicated by this dial gauge up here. At that point, I removed the rocker and allowed the canner to continue to slowly cool down for another 10 minutes. And now is the moment of truth. I will tell you that once you open up this canner, you're gonna have some steam come out. So it's gonna be important that you cover your hands and open the lid away from your face. So let me get my pot holders. You don't want steam burns on your hands or your face. Oh, it smells good. Look how much broth the rabbit itself created. Isn't that amazing? I didn't put any water at all in these jars with the raw rabbit. And we have lots of rich broth in there. Hey guys, so it's the next day and all of our canned rabbits sealed successfully. So I can remove the rings, wash the jar down, label them, and put them up on the shelf. You can see how much rich broth was created just from the rabbit itself. I didn't add any water, don't forget. This canned rabbit we can use to add to casseroles, to make like barbecue shredded rabbit. We can use it to make rabbit salad like you would chicken salad. Basically any way that you could use pre-cooked or canned chicken, you can do the same with the rabbit. You're just gonna have to debone it, which really isn't a big deal. And make sure that when you do use your canned rabbit that you strain out that broth. This is the most rich broth that I've ever been able to create. Don't waste it. It's the kind of broth that turns to Jell-O in the fridge, so that's how you know it's good quality bone broth. All right, the 75 minutes is up. I don't want to talk like that. All right, so the 75 minutes was up about 10 minutes ago. Nope, that's not true either. Let me just shut this off.